Welcome to Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we are broadcasting live on December 31st from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. We have a special show today. Later on in this hour, we're going to hear a 1993 Fresh Air interview with former President Jimmy Carter, who passed away over the weekend at the age of 100. But first up, we have a WMNF special, and I want to ask you to let us know what you think by emailing dj@wmnf.org. We're not going to take any calls today because we're jam-packed with content today. But let us know what you think, dj@wmnf.org, if you're listening live on the 31st of December in 2024. We're going to play right now, and I hope you enjoy it, our special. It's called Storm Surge, Impacts of the 2024 Hurricane Season on the Tampa Bay community.
You're trying to get water out of your house. You're trying to file your insurance work. You're doing all of those things. But at the same time, you have really been emotionally impacted. You are feeling it.
The 2024 hurricane season in Florida is a story about anxiety and destruction, but it's also about resilience and community.
We have a great volunteers here. It's amazing how everyone's helping and stopping by for food and supplies and giving donations.
Storm surge, impacts of the 2024 hurricane season on the Tampa Bay community. Meteorologists predicted we would see an active season. 3 named storms hit Tampa Bay in 2024. In early August, Debby blasted through before it made landfall in the Big Bend area of Florida as a Category 1 hurricane. The following month, Hurricane Helene and 2 weeks later, Hurricane Milton devastated neighborhoods.
Well, this is going to be potentially a once-in-a-lifetime storm for us here in the Tampa Bay area.
Sandy beaches line the Gulf Coast of the Tampa Bay region for dozens of miles. Barrier islands run parallel to the coastline, just 3 to 5 blocks wide in some places. The islands are thin strips of sand between the Gulf of Mexico and the Florida mainland. Waves from a storm can deposit new sand or rip new channels in these impermanent islands. Over time, sand dunes accumulate along the beaches, acting as a protective barrier between the Gulf and businesses and residents. There's also a large shallow estuary, Tampa Bay. Residents and planners feared winds and water from a hurricane entering it would push seawater from the bay into communities on the shore. Some of the larger cities in the area, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota, Bradenton, and Clearwater, are right next to the water. Many neighborhoods are at low elevations and prone to flooding, either after heavy rain or during very high tides. Less populated residential beachside communities like St. Pete Beach and Gulfport are packed with small independent businesses like beach bars and gift shops. Most people there live in modest single-family homes or waterfront condos. Some are longtime residents, while others are recent transplants from colder climates or snowbirds, a term locals use to describe people who come down during the winter. There's a much smaller group of residents whose lives are closely tied to the water, the live-aboard boating community. They live on small sailboats moored in Boca Ciega Bay in South Pinellas County or other somewhat sheltered bays. Nights are spent on their boats. During the day, they paddle to the shore to go to jobs, buy supplies, and shower in beachfront facilities. They're also among the most severely impacted whenever there's a storm. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration predicted 17 to 25 named storms for 2024, including 4 to 7 major hurricanes. In recent years, several hurricanes brushed the Tampa Bay area, but none of them directly struck the region. In 2022, Hurricane Ian made landfall near Fort Myers, about 126 miles south of Tampa. Ian caused devastation throughout much of the state from rainfall, winds, and storm surge, which typically causes the most damage. It occurs when hurricanes push seawater onto land. The water quickly moves into people's homes and businesses, destroying structures and sometimes drowning people who didn't evacuate. On Sunday, August 4th, Tropical Storm Debby passed well west of the Tampa Bay area, but close enough to generate ferocious conditions that it became dangerous for the live-aboard boat community in Boca Ciega Bay off Gulfport in Pinellas County. According to the Gabber newspaper, hazardous conditions made it impossible for first responders to help the residents trapped in their boats. So one boat captain rescued stranded boaters. He went ship to ship in a small inflatable craft while the waterfront streets of Gulfport flooded. Kathy Solustri is the co-owner of the Gabber.
The local boaters, whether they lived on a boat or whether they had a boat and lived on land, were really mounting this grassroots effort to find these people. And they did find some people.
Storm surge lifted several large sailboats onto the shore and became grounded, leaving one live-aboard boater missing. Brian Clow was later found drowned on his half-submerged boat.
There were more people missing at the start of the day than there were at the end. Most of them were found alive. These wonderful men and women, they didn't get to Brian in time.
Less than 2 months after Debby, the Tampa Bay area was preparing for another storm. On the morning of Thursday, September 26th, Hurricane Helene was in the Gulf of Mexico off the southwest coast of Florida, moving north and packing 100-mile-an-hour winds. The National Weather Service says winds that speed are extremely dangerous and can cause extensive damage. Near total power loss is expected because outages could last weeks. The Tampa Bay area was under hurricane, tornado, and flood watches. A storm surge of 5 to 10 feet was predicted for the coast. For context, 10 feet is higher than the bottom of most Floridians' roofs. It only takes a foot of water to sweep a vehicle away. Mandatory evacuation orders were in effect for low-lying coastal areas of Pinellas, Pasco, Hernando, and Hillsborough counties. Brian Clow's death and the harrowing experiences that the live-aboard boating community endured during Tropical Storm Debby led to people taking different approaches as Helene got closer. Some boaters remained moored in Boca Ciega Bay, but others, like Ben Monahan and Valerie Christo, decided to take the safer path and dock at the Gulfport Municipal Marina.
We're going to ride out the storm here. We want to keep the lines loose because of the surge that could potentially happen up to 8 or 9 feet. So because of that, we want to stay aboard.
The National Hurricane Center says 8 or 9 feet of storm surge is considered unsurvivable. Valerie rode out Debby in her boat. Ben tried to in his, but it was destroyed.
And after what I went through with the last storm, what we want to do is be responsible about it, keep everything okay, and make sure that Valerie, her boat is kept safe. The wind's picking up right now, as you can hear.
That's a gust.
That's a gust for sure. For sure. But it's much better here than we were out there.
Gulfport residents had concerns about the safety and choices of the live-aboard boat community as Helene approached. Karen Vanderbeek lives about 8 blocks from the water, but was not under an evacuation order.
I've lived here for 14 years, and the businesses know. The people that own these, they know what they need to do. Boat people are another story. Unfortunately, they haven't learned that part of boat life in a lot of cases. I think they're more aware this time after Tropical Storm Debby. I mean, we ended up with 20 boats wrecked, and some of them are still here, obviously. So, yeah, concern for some of them. Hopefully they took more precautions this time.
Even before the storm arrived, a steady stream of seawater filled roads.
We've got the usual flooding going on right now. You've got a combination of the weather and a high tide that happened at like 7:07 this morning, I believe. So this isn't anything really abnormal at this point. But yeah, this is the calm before the storm.
St. Pete Beach sits on a barrier island west of St. Petersburg. It's known for its beautiful beaches with soft white sand and emerald green water. The city was under mandatory evacuation orders from Helene. As the storm approached, some streets and intersections were already impassable from the rising seawater. Roxine Riles owns Woody's waterfront on St. Pete Beach. As she closed and secured her bar, the Gulf of Mexico smashed at the seawall just a few feet from it.
We're just closing up and buttoning up now for the safety of our employees and the safety of everybody. We don't want anybody to come out because they want to see the water. We're just getting ready to get everything done now and just ride it out like we normally do. Right now, the roads are underwater. The tide's high. It's going to get worse. Stay home if you're staying home. Otherwise, leave the island.
The water got higher and higher as Helene passed west of Pinellas on Thursday evening, and it kept rising as the storm headed north. The storm made landfall in Taylor County along Florida's Big Bend area as a Category 4 hurricane. The storm's strength produced catastrophic damage where it hit, leaving areas uninhabitable. Despite coming onshore about 170 miles north of Tampa, the region still felt devastation. It became clear the following morning just how badly some areas were affected. Hurricane Helene flooded tens of thousands of homes along the Gulf Coast. At least 12 Pinellas County residents died, most of them trapped in houses inundated by several feet of storm surge. Sand from beaches and dunes was pushed inland and covered streets and filled houses along the barrier islands. Matt Black owns Clearwater Pass Gym.
The community has really been coming together to get the beach back on track again, and I think everyone's going to come back better and stronger than ever before.
Black says he was relatively new to the area, but told by other locals this was the worst storm surge yet. Hurricane Helene's storm surge flooded homes with salt water from the Gulf of Mexico. Soon after the storm passed, the destroyed belongings were discarded on the curbs of thousands of homes in the Tampa Bay area. Several million cubic yards of debris lined the streets, including furniture, drywall, and boxes of ruined and waterlogged goods. Pinellas County officials called the amount of storm debris astronomically different compared to other storms. And a week after the storm, businesses in Gulfport were still cleaning up and residents gathering to share resources. Debbie Amos and her husband own the Tiki Bar and Grill. It's along the waterfront near the sand volleyball courts and the beach. The couple owns the business but leased the building. Amos says it sustained visible damage and estimates more than 4 feet of water entered the business.
The structures, are most of them anyway, are still standing, but everything on the waterfront here is completely damaged or a loss. Going in a few blocks from shore, probably up a good 4 to 5 blocks, I think, in this whole waterfront area is flooded, damaged, piles and piles of debris, and people's lives out on the curbs. And yeah, it's pretty surreal. It's what you see on TV, you know.
Helene tossed a large sailboat onto the shore across the street from the Tiki Bar. Amos says she's unsure when the bar will reopen.
Just cleaning up, trying to decide what we're keeping, what we're not, what can be salvaged or not. We have a great volunteers here. It's amazing how everyone's helping and stopping by for food and supplies and giving donations. But we're just trying to get through what we should focus on, get ready for pickup, things like that.
A volunteer group delivered supplies as Amos and other people cleaned out the debris at her restaurant. The donations came from an aid distribution center at a local theater about 6 blocks inland. In the days following the storm, Gulfport became a hub of community support. Volunteers accepted donations at the theater and distributed aid packages to go out into the community. Nearby, a food truck sponsored by World Central Kitchen, a nonprofit that provides food relief to people in crisis, handed out hot meals. A floating dock was ripped out of the water and deposited in front of the Gulfport Brewery several blocks inland during the storm. It became a staging area for mutual aid activities. Allendale United Methodist Church in St. Petersburg was another mutual aid center. It sits on high ground, but it's near many of the flooded streets in the Old Northeast neighborhood. The city of St. Petersburg set up a full-service laundry facility there for residents. Hurricane Helene's widespread damages and loss left many people reeling after the storm. Organizations like the Crisis Center of Tampa Bay connected people to local resources and mental health support. CEO Clara Reynolds says many callers just focused on meeting their basic needs.
You're trying to get water out of your house. You're trying to file your insurance work. You're doing all of those things. But at the same time, you have really been emotionally impacted. You are feeling it.
Reynolds says the Crisis Center fielded 712 hurricane-related calls the weekend the storm hit. Hurricane Helene's cleanup was ongoing and stressful for the people in Tampa Bay. Less than 2 weeks after landfall, Floridians learned another storm was heading their way. Monday, October 7th, Hurricane Milton formed near Mexico. The National Hurricane Center forecast the storm could cause surge at least as severe as Helene. Models showed the forward momentum of the storm, and the winds were expected to push Gulf of Mexico water toward the shore as it approached. A Category 5 storm was barreling toward Tampa Bay. More than 9 feet of storm surge was forecast for the entire coastline of Hillsborough County and the barrier islands in Pinellas, Manatee, and Sarasota. By Tuesday, Florida Public Radio Emergency Network meteorologist Megan Borowski said Hurricane Milton had slightly weakened, but was still expected to come ashore as a major storm.
Well, this is going to be potentially a once-in-a-lifetime storm for us here in the Tampa Bay area. Messaging from the National Hurricane Center from the NWS in Tampa Bay says that this could be the most devastating storm for Tampa in the last 100 years. So very strong language coming from them. And that's because Milton this morning is a very strong Category 4 hurricane. It explosively intensified yesterday. It dropped pressure immensely, and the winds were very strong. It was a very strong Category 5 hurricane yesterday. It's weakened slightly, but it might actually intensify a little more again.
Thousands of people heeded evacuation orders as Milton approached. Highways usually packed were like a ghost town, but roads leading out of St. Petersburg were jammed up.
If you are in an evacuation zone, Pinellas, Pasco, Hillsborough County, I know all of those evacuations are already underway. I know traffic is not fun to contend with, but your life is the most important thing out there. If you are in an evacuation zone, you're told to evacuate, please do everything you can to get out. There are resources if you need assistance.
Some drivers were stuck so long on highways to evacuate, they ran out of gas. Where Hurricane Milton made landfall would make a huge difference for people in Pinellas and Hillsborough counties. Early projections had the intense storm hitting near the mouth of Tampa Bay or further north. But as it approached, its path began to wobble. Forecasters said a difference of just 20 miles north or south could have devastating consequences for people near the bay. Kathy Perkins, the Pinellas County Emergency Management Director, said if people did not heed evacuation warnings, they would likely die. Tampa Mayor Jane Castor gave similar comments on CNN. But what some called luck for Tampa, others called tragedy about 67 miles south in Siesta Key. Wednesday, October 9th, just 13 days after Helene, that's where Hurricane Milton made landfall. While the brunt of the storm hit south, Milton brought hurricane-force winds to the Tampa Bay area and hours of flooding rainfall, but significantly less storm surge than Helene.
Hurricane Milton has made landfall in Siesta Key in Sarasota County as a Category 3 storm. That means you should stay inside and stay put, get into a central area of your home, and get low as you can if you have no storm surge. Sustained winds are about 78 miles per hour and gusts of 97 were reported in Venice. The eye wall is currently hitting Tampa Bay pretty hard right now, and there are some widespread power outages.
These wind speed totals are just shocking. Venice, 97 mile per hour gusts and 78 mile per hour sustained winds. At the Egmont Channel near Egmont Key, 100 mile per hour wind gusts, 77 mile per hour sustained winds. At the Skyway Fishing Pier, 83 mile per hour gusts and 67 mile per hour sustained winds. At the Sarasota-Bradenton International Airport, 73 mile per hour winds and 40 mile per hour sustained winds. These are intense winds as this storm Milton comes ashore, and it's headed for the folks inland too. This is not stopping on the coasts. It doesn't just quit. We're in for a few hours here of really intense winds, so it's important to stay alert, stay aware. There's still tornado watches and warnings across West Central Florida. It's important right now to be inside, to be in an interior room in your house.
St. Petersburg Mayor Ken Welch is at the Emergency Operations Center there.
Regardless of the exact landfall location, the Tampa Bay area will be met with major hurricane strength winds. We will be fully staffed at the EOC throughout the night. First responders are officially off the roads and will not be able to respond to emergency calls until it's safe to operate and weather conditions allow. If you have an emergency, call 911 and they will get to you as soon as it's safe to do so. Residents should also be aware that the Northeast and Southwest sewer treatment plants have been taken offline.
Milton broke a lot of records. It was one of the fastest intensifying storms in history, going from a Category 1 to 5 in 24 hours. And when it barreled into the state, Milton spawned at least 46 tornadoes, a one-day record for Florida. After the storm blew past, people who hunkered in place surveyed the damage. High winds uprooted and blew over 100-year-old oak trees, blocking roadways and crashing through roofs. Large branches littered residential front and backyards. The torrential rain washed away sand from beaches, flooded neighborhoods, and broke water pipes. Downtown St. Pete recorded 101-mile-an-hour winds. A large construction crane toppled into the corner of the office building home to the Tampa Bay Times newspaper. Winds ripped the fabric roof off of Tropicana Field, the domed baseball stadium home to the Tampa Bay Rays. Tattered fragments of the roof flapped in the breeze as they clung to the metal frame of the now open roof. More than 1 million people were without power the morning after in the Tampa Bay region, including the small city in Pinellas, Gulfport. Tom Nichols, the city's public works director, said erosion caused a water main break near Boca Ciega Bay, where water gushed up and twisted a sidewalk and road.
Well, with all the water, all the rain we had, it undermined the roadway. The roadway collapsed, and it broke the 6-inch water main down there.
Nearby, many St. Petersburg residents lost drinking water access during the storm because of a major water main break. Storm surge inundated some of the city's sewer treatment plants as well, knocking them offline. Drinking water was restored to most people in St. Pete rather quickly, but in Gulfport, a boil water notice stayed in effect for a week. Parts of Gulfport Beach eroded during the storm, including the sand volleyball courts by the Tiki Bar and Grill. That's where Helene damaged the area just 2 weeks before.
It was the same thing, all the rain that we had, and then when the water went back out, it just undermined all the sand and took it back out to sea. So we got quite a bit of sand that we're missing, and erosion underneath the walkways and the casino pad.
Nichols said there were a lot of trees down across the city.
A lot of power lines down. People should stay out of the area as everybody's messaging out. We got crews coming in. We have National Guard coming in to help us start clearing.
Homes, stores, businesses, and streetlights were dark from blown down power lines. The Florida National Guard was among groups taking an important first step in allowing people safe access back to their communities. They cleared trees, downed power lines, and other debris. Gasoline for cars or home generators became difficult to find after the storm. Many stations ran out of fuel, but without electricity, even the gas stations with fuel could not pump it, and some turned to portable generators. Dozens of cars waiting in line to tap gas from a single working pump was a common sight. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced the state would set up fuel distribution areas where people could get a maximum of 10 gallons per car. A few days after the storm, St. Pete resident Stacy waited 2.5 hours in a line of cars at a fuel distribution site across from the now roofless Tropicana Field.
I unfortunately didn't go out and get some thinking I had enough. I had enough for 3 days thinking, and then last night I looked at the generator and them empty. So I got up this morning and got over here, and hopefully,
The rain caused local rivers to swell. A number of rivers overflowed their banks, or threatened to, for several days after the hurricane. Mark Fulkerson is the chief professional engineer with the Southwest Florida Water Management District.
We are seeing flooding occur in areas that aren't mapped for it, just because of the amount of historic rainfall that we got with this storm and how wet things were prior. Some of the rivers, over the next several days, we're going to see those water levels dropping. And, it may take a week or more, 2 weeks, before they're back below flood levels.
As the rainwater moved downstream and into channels and rivers, some neighborhoods saw flooding on a different timeline than others.
But so many of these other areas back in the neighborhoods where maybe a river came out of its banks and flooded into a neighborhood, and then the river's receded, but that water level in that neighborhood has no way to get out now. So it may sit there for quite a while, could be several weeks.
Debris wasn't the only danger lurking in the floodwaters. An unusually high number of potentially fatal flesh-eating bacteria cases were reported after the storm. The bacteria emerge in the Gulf in the summer and coincide with storm cleanup and hurricane season. Florida Department of Health Public Information Officer Tom Iovino said the bacteria bring heavy risk.
It's an infection, so you see the typical redness, swelling, discharge, but then it could become ulcerated and it can become very dangerous after that.
The state health department reported 13 cases in Pinellas County through mid-October. The hurricanes reshaped parts of the shoreline. Storms leveled sand dunes, eroded or added to beaches, and created water passes where there used to be land. The United States Geological Survey blamed the heaviest erosion on Hurricane Helene. Kara Doran is a scientist at the USGS in St. Petersburg. She says sand dunes are essential in preventing beach erosion and are a crucial component in protecting communities from high storm surge. They are the first line of defense in protecting homes, roads, and other infrastructure from high water.
Areas with nice, high, wide sand dunes are protected from a lot of the effects of the storm, because as those water levels rise and the large waves come in, they're going to impact the dune first, and the dune can absorb a lot of that wave energy.
Dunes provide protection and allow for beach renourishment to occur at a faster rate. Doran says it would take nature years to a decade to return beaches and dunes to their previous states unless people intervene to replenish sand.
Communities don't want to wait that long for that process to take place, and so working with human intervention and engineering can bring that sand back to the beach, can rebuild the dunes.
After Helene, a lot of the sand from dunes was washed into streets and homes or carried back out to sea. Things slowly returned to normal in the months after back-to-back storms, and while recovery was still happening, most beaches were again open to the public. Many of the boats that littered the shorelines had been removed by salvage crews, and the live-aboard boating community was, for the most part, back to the routines of spending nights aboard and the days on shore. Debris cleanup was coming to an end. Giant piles of tree limbs and mountains of flooded belongings had been mostly cleared away from the streets. Manatee County cleared more than 2 million cubic yards of debris from the 3 hurricanes. Pinellas County cleared more than 650,000 cubic yards, and the city of Tampa collected 1.3 million cubic yards of hurricane debris. In beach communities, sand was cleared from the roadways and homes. Pinellas County was moving clean sand that piled into streets and into homes back onto the beaches. The National Guard began hauling accumulated sand piles at beach access parks along Gulf Boulevard to assess the sand to see if it could be reused. A similar project was happening in Manatee County, where Brad Zink is the emergency management coordinator.
We're using a 3/8-inch diamond-shaped screen through our screeners to get out any type of material, even the shell, the rocks, and everything, so that when it goes back on the beach, it's pretty much like a crystal type of white sand that everybody has been known to enjoy and stuff with their families.
The program allowed Manatee County to keep tons of sand on its beaches.
We didn't want to bring in sand from other parts of the county or parts of the state even, not knowing the origin of it, not knowing, even if the sifting part would even work for that and make it the crystal clear like our sand is. So we wanted to keep it in the natural habitat that it is, and that's just basically putting it back on after we clean it.
The sand that wasn't fit for beaches, like sand collected from parking lots, commercial lots, and residences, typically with larger debris, was dedicated for roads and capital projects. The county said that will contribute to significant savings.
It's hard to put words out there because of how much devastation there was, and then to look at what we've done and where we're at now, it's huge. It's huge.
To aid in the healing process after the storms, local artist Yala Ford invited school children and community leaders to put their handprints on a new mural.
I think it's been scary. I think it's been overwhelming. I think that it's also been more traumatic to put together because I think there was much more damage than any of us really realized. But I think that's what makes us so much stronger. I think that we can now see a brighter future. I think that we can also, on top of seeing a brighter future, be able to connect different dots. We're able to really, I think, come together in this moment and heal together.
LaFord's All Hands United mural is outside the Museum of Fine Arts along the downtown St. Petersburg waterfront. She says it symbolizes resilience, unity, and strength, and ties people together as the community heals.
You see that our streets are now cleared. We see that, I think just as you have waves that rise, they fall, and then we reassess, and we come up with different clever ways to, I think, improve humanity. I think that, it's all about rebuilding. I think it's a refreshed viewpoint and a renewal, and one that we can actually find bright lights. And I think that, I look for moments where these kids that are at Mount Zion, we're bringing 100 of those kids to put their hands in the formation and movement of the ocean and find that those silver linings of the community leaders that we're now leaning on to make sure that we're making good decisions forward in order to make sure that in history, 100 years from now, we can see such a beautiful space that we rebuilt.
Scientific organizations like NASA say global climate change, fueled by human-caused changes to the atmosphere, will likely create more intense hurricanes and cause a higher risk of flooding to coastal communities from increased storm surge. Climate change will lead to more severe weather events with heavier rainfall, rapid intensification of storms, and more Category 4 and 5 hurricanes. Storm surge, impacts of the 2024 hurricane season on the Tampa Bay community. Written, produced, and narrated by Sean Canan at the studios of WMNF Tampa. Thanks to the WMNF News team, including Randy Zimmerman, Megan Bowman, Chris Young, Lisa Marzilli, Ben Montgomery, Leah Burdick, Leah Marcy, and Ernesto Radich, and the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network. Public domain music by the Maravines. Copyright 2024 by WMNF, WMNF.org. Well, that was Storm Surge, impacts of the 2024 hurricane season on the Tampa Bay community. And you can let us know what you think by emailing dj@WMNF.org. You can also listen to it again or share it with a friend because it's on our website, WMNF.org. So let us know what you think, and we'll certainly take that to heart. I want to play next an interview from 1993 with former President Jimmy Carter, who passed away over the weekend at the age of 100. Here's what AP is saying this morning about the latest news about the funeral services, etc. Tributes to former President Jimmy Carter are pouring in from his small hometown of Plains, Georgia, and around the world. In Plains, black ribbons are hung alongside U.S. flags as residents mourn the 39th president who died Sunday at the age of 100. They are remembering Carter as Mr. Jimmy, the neighbor who was friendly and approachable. But in Washington, D.C., at the United Nations and abroad, Carter's status as a global figure is on display. President Joe Biden has set January 9th as a day of mourning. Federal offices will be closed for Carter's state funeral. And the UN Security Council praised Carter for his diplomatic and international peace efforts as president and after his one White House term. So here is a 1993 Fresh Air interview with former President Jimmy Carter. And you can hear Fresh Air on WMNF's All News HD3 channel, The Source, weekdays at 3 in the afternoon. It comes on right after Tom Hartman. If you'd like to listen to The Source, you can go to WMNF.org or you can listen on the WMNF app. Here's that 1993 interview with Jimmy Carter. This is WMNF Tampa.
This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. Today, we remember Jimmy Carter and listen back to excerpts of the interviews I recorded with him over the years. He died at the age of 100 and had been the oldest living former president in American history. Let's begin with the interview I recorded with Carter in 1993 after the publication of his memoir, Turning Point, about his first campaign when he won his seat in the Georgia State Senate. That was in 1962. The year he decided to enter politics.
Well, I had come home from the Navy, having been 11 years a full-time naval officer, a submarine officer. Started a small business and had never run for elective office. I was a chairman of the Sumter County School Board in the heat of the integration years. I was concerned about the closing down or the subversion of our public school system. And I was disgusted in a way with the slow pace of the civil rights changes in the South. And then along came the bright, halcyon days of the one-man, one-vote ruling, where the Democratic white rural primary was going to be stricken down. I thought it was a new day in Georgia and the United States where the democracy would prevail and honesty would be there and equality would be ensured. And so I decided I would run for the state senate. And the only request I would make, and did finally make, was to be on the education committee. And I entered this little community over in the western part of Georgia, Georgetown, Georgia. And I found shocking fraud, corruption, stuffing ballot boxes, abuse of citizens. That was incredible to me.
Well, you say you found blatant voting abuse. What's the worst example of voting abuse that you faced during that first campaign of yours?
Well, I was ahead in the election going into this little tiny county on the Chattahoochee River, just across the river from Alabama. There was a political boss in the county named Joe Hurst. He was chairman of the only political organization, the Democratic Committee. He was a state legislator. His wife was a welfare director. Georgetown was the only post office in the United States, for instance, where all the welfare checks came to the same post office box. And he and his wife would personally deliver the welfare checks to families that they decided should be on welfare. One of the prerequisites for getting welfare payment was to vote the way Joe Hurst told them. Everyone who voted in my election in that little town voted on an open table in front of Joe Hurst and one of his henchmen, whose name was Doc Hammond. Joe Hurst watched them vote. They put their ballots in a large whiskey box, a pasteboard box with a 5-inch hole in the top, and quite often I watched Joe Hurst reach in, pull out the ballots, examine them, even change them when he wanted to, and put in ballots of his own. It was literally incredible. And he was so powerful that he was impervious to criticism. He didn't even care if I saw him cheating. He had control of a district attorney. He had control of a trial judge. He had been indicted 8 times on felony charges, convicted 4 times, but never served a day in jail or paid $1 in fine. He was so powerful, it was unbelievable to me. And so I had that to challenge, and many of the people in that little county were intimidated by Hurst. The crucial base of his operation was the county unit system. One vote in Georgetown was equal to 99 votes in Atlanta. And this was all legal. It was perfectly legal until the one-man, one-vote ruling came down.
Well, how did you win? How did you get your fair count?
Well, I think a lot of publicity had accrued. I couldn't get any publicity at all at first. The local newspapers, even in Columbus, Georgia, which is a fairly good-sized town, were kind of in bed with Joe Hurst, or they had seen him do this so long that they thought it was maybe acceptable or wasn't really a newsworthy item, until there was one very heroic reporter from the Atlanta Journal named John Pennington, who came down quite skeptical at first about my allegations. And he, on his own initiative, went into Quitman County, got some old records, interviewed Joe Hurst and all the other people, and found out that my accusations were true. And in a few days, this story about my election was a top headline news on the front page of the Atlanta newspapers. Joe Hurst eventually went to prison for vote fraud and also for dealing in illegal liquor. And when I finally got to the Georgia Senate, one of the things that I wanted to do, although I'm not a lawyer, was to revise the Georgia election code to correct some of the patent mistakes that had been deliberately maintained over decades or generations in Georgia to permit this kind of thing. And as we were debating the new election code, one of the interesting amendments that was put forward by a state senator from the town of Enigma, Georgia, an interesting name, was that no one in Georgia could vote in a primary election or a general election who had been dead more than 3 years. And
An interesting cutoff point.
Yeah, but there was a very interesting debate about it, too. People maintained that even though, say, a husband died, there was a certain period of time after his death when the wife and children could accurately cast his vote the way he would have voted if he had lived. And so how long after somebody's death, the circumstances change so much that you can't really predict how he would have voted.
Jimmy Carter, before we go any further, I'm going to ask you for a little lesson in etiquette. Do I call you President Carter, Mr. President, our former President Jimmy Carter? What is the appropriate etiquette when you're talking to a former President of the United States?
You know, one of the nice things about our country is you can call me anything you want to. Jimmy suits me okay. There is a custom in our nation that if you are have been a governor or an ambassador or a judge or president, then you can still retain the title. So if you want to call me president, you can. If you want to call me Jimmy, that's fine. You know, when I go through Georgia, small towns, and somebody is an old friend of mine, I know it immediately when they say, "Hi, Governor." They call this. That's whatever the most intimate relationship is. And the little kids around Plains, when I ride a bicycle or jog by, they if they are very devout, or if their families go to church every Sunday, they call me Brother Jimmy. Hello, Brother Jimmy. And a lot of them just call me, hello, Jimmy Carter. But it doesn't matter to me. I never was much dependent on the pomp and ceremony of the White House, even when I was there. And so Jimmy suits me fine.
Now, let me ask you, you've been devoting your post-presidential career to monitoring elections around the world, conflict negotiation around the world, human rights around the world. You also have a project in Atlanta to help empower the homeless and the poor. When you left office, what did you see ahead? What did you think you would do?
I didn't know. You know, I didn't anticipate being retired 4 years early. Fairly quickly, I decided to teach. And I've been a so-called distinguished professor at Emory University now. This is my 11th year. And I've enjoyed that professorship. I make most of my income on my books. All of them have been very good sellers. But when I left the White House, I didn't really know what I had to do except to build a presidential library, which was almost an impossible task for a defeated, Democrat who didn't intend to run for office anymore. And I wanted to write a presidential memoir called Keeping Faith, which I did because I was deeply in debt. And the proceeds from selling off all my business and from the writing of that first book let me pay off my debts. So the evolution of the Carter Center and the different things in which I've been now involved along with Rosalind have been really developments that we did not anticipate when we left Washington.
Was there a moment of revelation when it started to occur to you the role that you could take in this nation and in the world as a past president of the United States?
Yeah, in a way there was. I didn't anticipate or understand at all then the tremendous crying out around the world for someone that has been president of the United States to help with issues. Let me just give you one quick example. Mm-hmm. At the Carter Center now, we monitor all the conflicts in the world. We do this every day. There are few more than 30 major wars on Earth. Almost all of them are civil wars. with horrible devastation. Somalia is just a highly publicized one. They're just as bad in Sudan or Mozambique and other places. The problem is that those civil wars cannot be addressed except on the very rare occasions by the United Nations or the U.S. government. It's totally inappropriate for any representative of the UN to communicate with a revolutionary group that's trying to overthrow or change a government that's a member of the UN. So most of these civil wars go unaddressed or even unrecognized by the American or industrialized world. And so we go into those areas. I don't have any restraint on me. Because I have been president, I'm famous enough and welcome enough to go to an African nation to meet with the ruling leaders, for instance, and also to meet with the revolutionaries and see if they are tired of war or are convinced that they cannot win on the battlefield. Would they agree to let us mediate and try to bring about a ceasefire, at least long enough to orchestrate an election? They may not be willing to sit down in the same room or to acknowledge one another through a direct negotiation. But as you may know, I'm sure you do, science, the science of politics is self-delusion. Everyone who is running for office, for mayor or for president, whatever, believes that if the election is honest, and if the people know me and know all these other jokers running against me, surely I will win. So if we can convince both sides, or let them convince themselves that they can win if the election's honest, and that I can help guarantee that the election will be honest, they see a way to become president of that nation without continuing the war on the battlefield. So that is a kind of thing that I see very clearly now, which I did not understand at all, even when I was president.
Jimmy Carter recorded in 1993 after the publication of his memoir, Turning Point. He was elected president in 1976. I asked him about the high points and the low points of his inauguration day.
Well, I don't remember any low points. The high point, obviously, was assuming the role of a president of the greatest nation on earth and trying to keep a secret. We had planned a few days ahead of time to get out of the limousine for the first time in history and walk down Pennsylvania Avenue as just one of the people. And that secret was kept, one of the few secrets, by the way, that we kept while I was president. And it was a glorious reception. The weather was cold. I remember that my mother, who always knew how to take the starch out of people's sails and bring people back down to earth, I was very full of myself. And when we left the reviewing stand and started walk to the White House for the first time, really, the news media gathered around us. And my press secretary, Jody Powell, said, "Don't anybody talk to the news media. Everybody wants to have an interview." And I complied with Jody's request, but typically my mother said, "Jody, you can go to hell. I'll talk to whom I choose." And the TV folks and everybody got around, and they said, "Miss Lillian, aren't you proud of your son?" And I waited with great pleasure to hear my mother's response. And Mama said, "Which one?" So she took the wind out of my sails. That's one of the things I remember about Inauguration Day.
What was the most disorienting part of your first day and night in the White House?
The aura of the White House and the humility that you feel occupying the same quarters as those great men was overwhelming. Also, what do you do the next day? I had pretty well gotten my cabinet firmed up quite early after the election, and what do you do the next day to deal with a multitude of issues? I had a very fine agenda. I couldn't get much support originally from the Congress, although finally my batting average was about the same as Lyndon Johnson's or John Kennedy. I have to say, though, as a bottom line, that I was quite confident of myself. I wasn't plagued with trepidation that I was inadequate for the job. That may be presumptuous, but anybody who decides I want to be president of this great country has to be somewhat presumptuous. So I wasn't plagued with an inferiority complex. I felt that no matter what came up, that I could handle it as well as anyone.
What about during the hostage crisis? Was there ever a point where you wished that you weren't president, where you wished that you didn't have this terrible burden on your shoulders?
Well, about 2 o'clock in the morning in April, when we tried the rescue operation, and we couldn't succeed, that was perhaps the high point of despair in my presidency. And I knew that I had to get up early the next morning, about 6 o'clock, and prepare to go morning talk shows and explain to the American people that the rescue operation had failed. That was a very dismal point. Also, we knew that an accident had occurred and that one of the helicopters had flown into an airplane and that 8 people had died. And I had to notify those families during the night that their loved ones had perished in a secret operation. There's no way that anything else that happened during the 4 years could equal that as a time of discouragement and despair.
Yeah. You told us a little bit about what your inauguration day was like. Let's skip ahead to the inauguration of your successor, Ronald Reagan. What were you feeling that day as you realized that the hostages were going to be released on his watch, not on yours?
Well, I didn't realize that. I had not been to bed for 3 days and had negotiated in the most meticulous detail the release of the hostages. Everything was all agreed, and the hostages were in the airplane ready to take off at 10 o'clock that morning, Washington time. So we were just waiting to get word that they had cleared Iranian airspace. And when I went to the reviewing stand, when I relinquished the presidency to Reagan and he made his inaugural speech, before I left the reviewing stand, I was informed that the plane had indeed taken off and the hostages were all safe and free. I have to say that I didn't even think about the fact that it happened a few minutes after midnight, after noontime. I just knew that they were free, and that was one of the most glorious and happy moments of my entire life.
Even though it wasn't on your watch?
Well, to me, I didn't even think about it, but obviously that became the major story among the news media, that it happened about 20 minutes after I was no longer president. To me, that was insignificant, but it has still prevailed. Even your question indicates that it was a historically important fact that it happened a few minutes after I left the White House as a president rather than while I was still in office. I didn't even consider that as a major factor then. It was the news media, I think, that made that a major factor.
Jimmy Carter, recorded in 1993.
That was Terry Gross speaking with former President Jimmy Carter in 1993. And you can hear Fresh Air every weekday at 3 in the afternoon on WMNF's All News HD3 channel, The Source. It comes on right after the Tom Hartman Show, which is from noon to 3 every weekday. And here's how you can listen to WMNF's HD3 channel, The Source. You can listen at WMNF.org, or you can listen on the WMNF Community Radio app. Right now, our over-the-air HD signal is down for upgrades and scheduled upgrades. We're going to be back in the early part of January, I believe, that with over-the-air. So if you like to listen to your HD channels on WMNF over in your car HD radio, or if you're at your home HD radio, you'll be able to do that again very soon, but not right now. Right now, the best way is the WMNF app or on WMNF.org. And again, you can listen to Fresh Air at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on weekdays on WMNF's All News HD3 channel, The Source. Well, this has been Tuesday Cafe. We're broadcasting live on December 31st from WMNF in Tampa. I'm Sean Canan. And if you want to hear the WMNF special that we played earlier this hour, it's called Storm Surge: Impacts of the 2024 Hurricane Season on the Tampa Bay Community. You can listen to it right now or anytime on WMNF.org. You can also share it with a friend. Coming up next is Wavemakers, and we're going to hear their October interview with meteorologist Jeff Baradelli. It's all about climate change and hurricanes. And at noon is Wide Awake America. Today, host Nadine Smith is going to talk with historian Manisha Sinha. And the topic is Reconstruction, the rise and fall of democracy, and lessons for today. So thanks so much for supporting and listening to WMNF Community Radio. This is WMNF Tampa. You can also hear us in St. Petersburg, Sarasota, Lakeland, Clearwater, Bradenton, Safety Harbor, all over the Tampa Bay area and all over the world if you're listening on WMNF.org or on the WMNF app. Thanks so much for supporting community radio. If you're looking to get in a donation at the end of the year for your taxes, please consider donating to a great nonprofit, WMNF. And you can donate at WMNF.org. Happy New Year, everyone. Be safe tonight. Be safe always. And we'll see you next year. This is WMNF Tampa.